So I've had so many ideas about what to say, and then finally I realized disenchant. Let's take that word apart. Chant, song, poetry, speech. So that's what's being taken out of the world. And I mean that in a very specific, very concrete way. And this relates to almost everything that was said in the previous panel. It seems we have two realms. Form and emptiness is one way, or singularity and complexity, and so on. Mind and matter, and we're trying to bridge those. And the way that's been bridged in the past, and to some extent today in our practice, is through this middle term. We also have, for those who are hooked into the Tibetan system, Nirmanakaya, which is form, Dharmakaya, which is emptiness, and the thing in the middle, Sambhogakaya. It's also waking, dream, waking, sleep, and the middle is dream. And so what I'm talking about is that middle term. That Sambhogakaya, that dream, that speech, which also in Western psychological terms corresponds to emotion. And another key to what's going on there is the English word emotion. It's got emotion in it, it's got fluidity. So form is like static, emptiness is like the least static, the ultimate in ambiguity, the ultimate in possibility. It's all possibility. It's so all possibility. It seems terrifyingly like nothing, as David said, like annihilation. But it's that middle realm, and that's what we're doing when we meditate. We're contacting that realm, we're using that realm, we're manipulating that realm. That's almost a definition of meditation. And I was very pleased to be reading a paper by Anne Klein, who is the only other person I've ever seen say that, which that occurred to me quite a while ago, that that's really the definition of meditation, is working with that middle realm between form and emptiness, between certainty and complete ambiguity, between singularity and complexity. And what's the name for that? That's what we call subtle body, or sometimes subtle mind. In fact, the very ambiguity there, that it's both subtle body and subtle mind, is that it's between those two. It's the bridge. And the funny thing is, when I first hit the Tibetan system and I saw their subtle body systems, I said, there's more than one. How can there be more than one? You know, some practices have this system and some practices have this other system. I've seen two, and I'm sure there's probably even more. How can there be this ambiguity? I mean, if it's a body, that's the way it is. And so when Adam says that the ancients found ambiguity in the physical body, but we no longer have it because we've now, been able to take it apart. We now have this sort of scientific certainty about it. But still, this other realm, there is this ambiguity, and I think that's an irreducible ambiguity because it's on the way to emptiness. It's our bridge. It's what we can grasp onto and work with. So I'm on a little bit of a mission, and the mission is to talk about it. And that's why I wanted Jeffrey here, because he has written a lot about this. And for that, I really am grateful, and I think we should all be grateful, but I think we all need to be talking about it more. The trouble is, it's a tough subject to talk about, because once you leave the realm of form, certainty, and so on, you're moving away from science. You're not doing science anymore. And the scientists raise their hand in the back and say, this energy stuff. I mean, it's energy, too. Do you feel the energy in the room, by the way? How many feel the energy in this room? It's amazing. And where's that energy coming from? The scientists say, well, that's just all the cues here. You see the books, the toxins, and so on. It says, that's right. It's in me, but it's also in the room, and it's also in everything that's happened in this room, and all the thoughts and meditations that have gone on here. It's that world that bridges, and we've got to start talking about it. And so I'm on a mission here, which is that I think we need to talk about what?
But not from God.
Okay. We need to start talking about it more. We need to start being open, and I'm glad the neuroscientists walked in, because I have a plea to the neuroscientists, which is two. One is, don't suppress it, or all scientists, or the scientists in all of us.
Suppress what?
Talk about energy, subtle body, subtle mind.
But you've just described subtle body in a way that is evanescent.
Exactly.
So people who we hear about subtle body in a very different form from the Dalai Lama. And Richie, who's doing his Tuktum project, is looking for evidence with a thermograph. And you're talking about, you know, a kind of feeling into an aspect of life which cannot be imaged with a thermograph. So when you say talk about what?
Precisely. How are we
We're
ever going to
talking
get to
about.
mind? How are we ever? My first inclination was to talk about mind. We need to get to mind. We can't. It's that terrifying thing at the end of the road. Total ambiguity, total evanescence. This is a bridge to that. I know this is hard. It's hard for a scientist. Actually, I'm a scientist too. It's hard
not
for
so
me.
hard. This is what I'm going to talk about.
Oh, great. So that's my first request or suggestion for scientists and for the scientists in us all, and I've got a lot of it.
Can we hold the questions or comments?
Yeah.
Because your time is running out.
Okay. The other one is to study it, and I'm glad you're starting, because what neuroscience is trying to do, as I see it, is bridge the gap between form and emptiness, between matter and mind, and that's a huge gap. It's an unbridgeable gap, and if we could bridge it, we would be enlightened. That's what it means to be enlightened almost, is to bridge that gap and to live in both worlds. But we have this intermediate realm, the Sambhogakaya realm, the dream realm, the realm of song, poetry, of energy. And it's also a bridge, I think, between the individual or the singular and the multiple or collective. And almost everything that was said, I have stars by almost everything that was said in the first panel. We need to start talking about it. And why don't we talk about it? We don't talk about it, A, because it's Vajrayana. So the Tibetans say, you can't talk about that. You have your Samaya, it's too dangerous. But Thurman was pretty clear. There are good reasons for that, and only one of which is that it's potentially dangerous to people. So we have to find a way around that. We have to find a way of talking about it. And I know Jeffrey and Anne Klein and Eleanor Roche has just written an article in which she's approached. This is the only three I know. And I think another way to approach it is through what we call clinical psychology or psychology today, or cognitive psychology, because that's also that middle realm. It's something that sort of a science and sort of an art. It's not really a science in the same sense that science is science. It's also in that middle realm. And it's a place we can, in the modern world, tolerate. In fact, it may very well be the place where we can re-enchant the world in the modern sense, since we no longer could talk about Mount Meru and the 6 realms and so on. We've kind of all dismissed that, but here's a place where we might be able to re-enchant the world. And that's what I think it means, is to work in that middle ground, in that middle area. So that's my talk.
I actually composed my comments, partly because you're all such erudite people, but also because many of you are not clinicians. And I want to just give you a context. Like in the Buddhist time, there's actually a revolution happening in Western psychotherapy, which is recognizing that there is a nervous system to work with and a body. And many of us now are fully trained in somatic psychotherapies that are biophysical methods for actually working in the body and unwinding habitual trauma in the body. And so I am one of those people. So some of the things I'm going to tell you about come from this methodology. So I first wanted to start by just engaging with a couple of problems I had with the actual question itself. Actual transcendent dimensions, or the act of transcending something, belongs to the Samkhya Vedanta tradition. It's not actually part of the Buddhist teachings. However, the paramis, or the paramitas, can be translated in 2 different ways. The first way is excellence or perfection, and the other way is that which goes beyond. And in that way, transcendent is a part of the Buddhist teachings. For me, the 10 paramis, or the 6 paramitas, depending if you're in the Theravada tradition or the Mahayana tradition, they comprise a beautiful method for liberating people from kleshic suffering. And one of the lovely threads that kept coming up in our days together was trying to expand our capacity to maybe bring in other kinds of the Buddhist teachings to help people clinically. I was very surprised that nobody mentioned the 10 paramitas or the paramis. So I'm actually going to discuss the question by looking at the 6th paramita, which is transcendent wisdom. But before I do that, I have one other little problem, and that is with the word disenchanted world. I looked up the definition, the same thing you did. I looked up the definition of disenchanted, and this is what I found. Disappointed by someone or something, disillusioned. If I use this definition, according to the Buddhist teachings, human existence has been disenchanted since the beginningless beginning due to the pervasive delusion of primordial ignorance. So in order to wisely discuss the role of transcendent wisdom in psychotherapy context, I think I'm going to have to throw out disenchanted world and instead embrace the idea of disenchantment as it's encouraged in the Buddhist teachings. So primordial ignorance is the habitual embedded reification of internal and external phenomena as permanent, independent, and unchanging. And Cliff did such a beautiful job yesterday. There were moments when I thought, I had a reincarnation of Jade Tsongkhapa in the room as you were giving your presentation, truly. You did such a beautiful job of describing reification and de-reification. But disenchantment in the Buddhist sense is transcendent wisdom because it is the direct recognition of the way things actually are, impermanent, empty of any separate self-existence, and comprised of utterly groundless, discretely arising, existing, and cessating moments of decoherence. I have heard my teacher Mingyur Rinpoche say, we put ourselves into prison, and we are the prison guards. So this is a pointing out instruction I'm continually offering my patients, teaching them how to recognize what I call the illusion of continuance and security, and our continual grasping at distorted self-narratives that perpetuate this conceptual prison of samsaric suffering. And they really relate to the illusion of continuance and security because they can see how devastatingly wrong their mentally constructed schemas actually are. So innate reification is the mechanism of subject-object dualistic perception. And some of the academics in the room may think of subject-object dualism as just a construct, but for a clinician, it is the main source of cognitive affective suffering. Therefore, an intervention for developing transcendent wisdom must include the dissembling of the delusion of inside and outside self and other. And for me, this is a twofold intervention, which brings about a fundamental shift in distorted cognitive affective reactivity. So the first step is pointing out the phenomenality of the field of mind and its contents. This is critical because the ego rules the narrative constructed process and spins a very convincing story that thoughts and feelings are us. And not only that, they are a true, accurate depiction of experience. People don't even know there's a field of mind, nor do they know the contents are just phenomena. Transcendent wisdom is the capacity to recognize the field of mind and its contents as impermanent, empty of any separate self-existence, and comprised of utterly groundless, discretely arising, existing, and cessating moments of decoherence. This process is not difficult to do because once it's pointed out, it is immediately apparent. And the next step is to then draw the patient's awareness into the contextual richness of physicality as it actually is. This is direct recognition of the experience the body is already having. It's an aliveness characterized by embodiment, embeddedness, extendedness, and inactivity, known as the 4E cognition. It's a reality. It's a real felt experience. It's an intercorporeal dance of body, mind, contents, and world, all simultaneously arising, existing, and passing away. I call this conventional non-duality. Experience as it actually is from a nervous system point of view. Now, this is easy to do. It's easy to facilitate when a clinician has the psychological and somatic therapeutic skills that allows a patient to place attention on mental, emotional, and autonomic nervous system distress, and then teach the patient how to rest awareness in the body's organismic capacity to heal its own autonomic wounding and homeostatic imbalances. The instruction that Ajahn Amaro described at the end of his talk for dealing with trauma is actually a powerful somatic psychotherapeutic intervention that I and my patients use all the time. So transcendent wisdom is, in a conventional sense, cutting through the distorted continual reification of inner narratives and its ensuing separateness, a going beyond distorted subject-object dualism and arriving in the intercorporeal connected physicality of the body's organismic wisdom and compassion. I don't know if I have enough time to say a couple of...
I'm so engaged, I forgot to...
Can I just say a couple experiences from my patients? So this is them speaking, yes? It's only one more page. Is this okay?
A couple of minutes, okay?
Okay, no problem. Well, it won't take that long.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Go.
So here's one of my patients. I woke up about 3 a.m. with a fast heart rate and thoughts of impending doom. Becoming aware of the bodily feeling of anxiety allowed me to relax into the experience of anxiety. My mind was with the reality of my bed, the warmth and comfort of just being in the dark. No threat, no danger, just seeing mind for what it was. Reality was in my body. I felt a distance from the anxiety which was so compelling and clear. The thoughts of sudden death, impending doom, things I'd done wrong cycled through, but I stayed with them, and they felt just like racing thoughts. Then I returned awareness to my body, my refuge. Very liberating experience. And there's no need to change one's thoughts or convince oneself out of anything. Just knowing experience as it is. This experience represents the confidence and fearlessness that spontaneously arises in the aliveness of what I call embodied presence. Additionally, in the ultimate sense, these moments, which are free of kleshic delusion, are a going beyond or transcending the distorted view of subject-object dualism. This is always an outcome of some measure of realizing the peerless wisdom and compassion that are intrinsic to the innate luminosity of mind, or what is called pure awareness. The more directly we recognize transcendent wisdom, the more we begin to have experiences like this experience, again from a patient. I'm starting to see directly, or at least glimpse now and then, that the whole constellation of sensation and experience isn't actually real or external or permanent, but workable. This is why not-self is not dissembling of self. It is an integration of mind, contents, body, and world that immediately dissolves the distortions of subject-object dualism. This is the liberation of genuine mental health that every patient deserves to receive from psychotherapeutic treatment. And I firmly believe every clinician should be trained in the appropriate skills to be able to facilitate true liberation from suffering. If our goal is a wiser, more compassionate world, then we have to offer our disembodied, anesthetized population tools to re-inhabit and reconnect with the transcendent wisdom of intercorporeality.
Okay, well, I'm up here, thank you very much. I'm up here as the kind of everyman, just responding without really having any opportunity to think this through, but it's very interesting to me. I mean, there's several thoughts dancing around, and so one is that I'm very struck, and I think this goes along with what David was saying and Steve was saying. There are so many levels, so many different themes. You know, I would not have thought about this question, and I had something to do with writing it. I would not have thought about it in the way that the two of you approached it, and I think that that's just a wonderful lesson, you know, to remember that there is no one approach to knowledge. There is no one way of understanding. I do think there is something about the Western form of understanding, and in particular the privileging of science, which we've talked about to some extent, which has to do with a kind of narrowing down of the range of possibilities for knowledge. I don't at all want to say anything critical of science here. It's just that it's got a methodology, and certain kinds of questions are much easier to deal with in that methodology. And I think that one of the characteristics then of our culture, and I think the reason for the word disenchantment, it's, in German it's Entzauberung, and it has to do with magic, really. You know, the magic has been lost in some sense. But I think what both of you pointed toward is that perhaps on the conceptual level, that leads into a real bifurcation where the kinds of knowledge that count are have to be in some way amenable to rational discourse, let's say, or perhaps empirical observation in a third-person sense. But when you talk about the body, and you talk about the possibility of going into the body, and you used the word, Lisa, intercorporeal dance, which was very nice. When you talk about the body, then you know, there is a sense, I think, that the more you go in, the more you also inhabit the whole. And to the extent that that is possible, then perhaps transcendence and disenchantment, and perhaps there's a better word there, transcendence and a kind of insistence on a dumbed down empiricism, let's say, which does, in the common sense, the sort of everyday natural attitude way of engaging the world, I think does apply. That dichotomy can be itself, maybe not transcended, but discarded. We don't need to go there. We don't need to do it that way. So we have time for some questions, at least 5 minutes or so before scheduled break. One of the reasons I volunteered to be up here was I knew I'd have very little to say, so we get back on schedule.
I'm imagining that the way you were using the term disenchantment was in the kind of Weberian sense,
yeah,
where you know he says that the modern world has been disenchanted. We no longer believe in spirits and gods, and the mystery, in a sense, has been taken out. And now we work by the clock, and there's a factory, and there's the iron cage. He uses that metaphor. And I thought, when I read things like Thich Nhat Hanh, for instance, that there's an effort there to kind of re-enchant the world. So in part of the move that Buddhism has often made, I think, in the modern world is a move of re-enchantment. But I think it's actually a little more complex than that, in that I think there's a kind of dialectic between enchantment and disenchantment going all the way back. Some of the translations of the Pali literature use that word disenchantment as what we're supposed to, I can't remember the Pali word off the top of my head that they're using, but we're supposed to be disenchanted with phenomena. We're supposed to realize there, as you were saying, the insubstantiability, the ephemerality of it, and we can't cling on to it. And yet there's other literature that like the Avatamsaka, that just presents the world as this full, rich, enchanted, wild, magical place. And so I think that's interesting too, and that we could bring both of those impulses into the modern world, in the sense that maybe we need some re-enchantment in various ways from the the expulsion of a lot of the magic from the world that the modern era has brought about. But I think also we could use some disenchantment, because we're always being bombarded with images and just constant sort of enchanting ephemera, mostly commercially driven. And when I think about what my students might be able to use in a very kind of practical now sense from mindfulness and meditation, that might be one of the more interesting things that could have an immediate payoff. Like, let's look at this, and can we kind of look at some of these images that are so powerful and that are so consuming our mental energy, and have some of that early Buddhist aspect of disenchantment.
So I think what I was hoping, so hard to do in such a short time, is that re-enchantment means re-inhabiting. That the world is already unbelievably enchanting, but not in the hope and fear, craving and aversion way. That's being grasped, sort of enchanted with something that is delusional. The actual physicality of our experience is unbelievably rich, and yet, because of what Stephen pointed out, and Descartes' dualism and all of this, we've become so completely disembodied and separated, and our narratives are so fully real to us. We experience our world through our narratives, not through the actuality of experience. Just dropping in to the world the body's already experiencing is unbelievably enchanting. And in that way, you're both doing the Buddhist disenchantment with the ideas in the mind that are false and distorted, and then the re-inhabiting of the actuality of the world that is so incredibly enchanting. So I agree.
Yeah, I agree with what Lisa said. And I was thinking of starting that way, saying, I thought it was clever to start by saying, well, it's not the world that's disenchanted, it's our minds. The world is enchanted. The world is the world. But then I think, wait a minute, wait. The world and the mind, if I believe what they're trying to say, the world and the mind arise together. So I can't say that. We can't separate the world and the mind. It gets very complicated. It's kind of a weird feedback loop there going on, and you get what mathematicians call a dynamical system, or a fractal, which is very complicated, and so on. And seems like statistical mush. There's no guidepost, but actually out of that rise things. In fact, our whole world actually is, in some sense, a dynamical system, a fractal. Everything we see is just that kind of, if you know the term, an attractor. It's kind of just a convergence of energy in that huge feedback system. And getting back to my original theme, what we call energy, soul, body is our way of kind of actually experiencing that. It's a dance. It's a dance. A dance is a wonderful word because it's art, it's song, music, it's movement, it's back and forth, it's two, it's one, it's in that world. Can I say something to Cliff?
Sure.
Vagal theory. It's not in the brain. I think it's
Steve's
not going to be
controversial dude.
What?
Stephen is a
I know he is, and I have a lot of problems with him, but
And the language you just used, vagal, it's not in the brain. That's already so hopelessly dualistic that we shouldn't even tangle on that.
well, if you give up hope before you start, how far will you get?
We measure these things. We just have last week the remarkable discovery of lymph
Right. Lymph nodes
tracts in the brain.
Of what?
Lymph
tracts.
nodes.
And I just read an article
Every
saying-
anatomy textbook for the last 150 years says the lymphatic system ends at the neck.
Yep.
And the lymph, we've had a piece of human anatomy discovered in published last week. The intimate dialogue between the thing that we entitize as brain and the thing that we entitize as the Vegas, that is already so condensed and singularized that, you know, for public consumption, we can think about safety systems. But, you know, Steve doesn't have the neuroscience background. So these things are so intimate, it's really a long
Yeah,
discussion.
thank you. Let me just say, we're back on schedule, which is very nice. Let's take a break for 15 minutes, and you can
Thank you,
certainly
everyone.
continue that discussion. So, thank you.